Well, hello there, motherfuckers, and it is time for another movie review. And I'm going to talk about Star Trek Beyond. Now, as everybody knows, well, not everybody, but I haven't reviewed a Star Trek movie in, say, 3 years since Into Darkness, which was the last J.J. Abrams film. Now we've noticed that J.J. Abrams now is just the producer on this film, and now Justin Lin has taken over the director's role. Now I don't know if this is a huge problem, but I'm gonna be perfectly honest. Even though I'm a fan of J.J. Abrams and I'm a big fan of Lost and his work with Star Wars with the Force Awakens, but I did not like Into Darkness at all. I thought that it was pretty much just a Wrath of Khan ripoff, and I know a lot of people attacked me back then, saying that yeah, it's not really a ripoff. It's more of a retelling of the story. We see Kirk dying instead of Spock, or like dying, but he doesn't die. But it was a retelling, and that was the point of it. And a lot of people said that I missed the point on my Into Darkness review. But the thing was, I thought it was quite lazy. And somebody put into perspective, I was reading a review online, a blog review, and somebody put it really into perspective, saying that, what Into Darkness well, first I should probably say that Star Trek was an origin story. Then with the second movie, they right away went into, um, doing a remake of Wrath of Khan. And now with the third movie, as they put it, it's a train wreck. And that's exactly what this film was. It was an absolute train wreck. And I think it's like J.J. Abrams was kind of steering a rickety cart across the tracks. Like, started off really good with the first movie. And I think a lot of people agree that that is the best film. Now, Into Darkness received a lot of praise. Now, me being a really big Wrath of Khan fan, I just couldn't bring myself to say that that movie was great because it was just a cheap remake, and I wasn't really in the mood to see a remake. Wrath of Khan is so good that it doesn't need a remake, and I keep saying that about all these reboots. Star Trek is already a reboot, so I guess JJ felt that it was okay to reboot Wrath of Khan. And I think maybe that's why people draw the comparisons with Star Wars with A New Hope and Force Awakens because there's some similarities, but it wasn't like Into Darkness was to Wrath of Khan. That was just at least you could say that there were all different characters in The Force Awakens and a different plot, a different villain, totally just different characters altogether. So, you could draw comparisons, but they're just comparisons. This was, a veritable remake. And I was not really in the mood to see a remake. Maybe that's just me. Like I said, I'm not a big fan of remakes. I feel like, most of the time they fail. RoboCop, for example, Ghostbusters, not that really that the RoboCop remake was bad per se, but it wasn't great and it wasn't good and it really wasn't necessary. And a lot of times, whenever they make a remake, it always removes a lot of the charm. They try to get a little bit too serious and take away from certain things, such as the iconic shouting of Khan, for example, by William Shatner. There's just certain things that if you don't have that in the remake, it's just going to make the remake better by default. So we're not here to talk about Into Darkness. I kind of want to just set it up. But it's already you see where it's going. We're going back to Star Trek Origins, and then we're already remaking Wrath of Khan. And so I thought that was a big mistake by J.J. Abrams, probably one of the biggest mistakes of his career, trying to turn the Star Trek universe into something that it didn't need to go in that direction, you know. And I saw that same blog. They put it so eloquently. The Star Trek universe hasn't been really exploring new worlds, as the old intro would suggest. They have been retreading old ground. And there's no reason to be retreading old ground in a series that has so many possibilities. I mean, you look at the large number of Star Trek novels, it's just like Star Wars. The possibilities are endless. I mean, I'm kind of surprised there hasn't been a Star Trek animated series or more Star Trek video games. There's such an expansive world that you could explore. The Star Trek universe is probably just as big as the Star Wars one. But J.J. Abrams just got really lazy with Into Darkness, just reusing a classic villain. And there wouldn't have been any problem reusing Khan, if he was used in a different context, in a different way, in a different plot. It didn't have to mirror the same movie. And what Beyond tries to do as well, it just introduces a very uninteresting villain and an uninteresting plot, and the pacing is just terrific. And I'm going to be quite honest with you with this film. I fell asleep twice during the film. I didn't even really get to see the entire finale. Uh, I'm waking up at the end and I'm seeing the Enterprise rebuilt, kind of in fast motion, fast forwarding through it. And I was like, oh, what did it blow up? I mean, we see that the Enterprise is kind of marooned and they restarted. And there's some key scenes that where they look like they belong in a good Star Trek film, but everything else surrounding it is just horrible. It really is. I mean, and there's a lot of like witty dialogue between Kirk and and Bones, but the thing is about it goes overboard. And I had to mention this, like everything was irking me about this film. Bones was always, very sarcastic, witty, with that dry humor, that dry, sarcastic wit. But he's like way too much in this film. Every opportunity they get a scene with Kirk and Bones, they like put that fucking classic 60 Star Trek sarcastic wit into overdrive, and it's way too much. I was like, Jesus, calm down with the sarcastic wit there, Bones. It's a little bit too much. I mean, and I kind of like these characters are not even saying anything most of the time, and if it is, it's being lost to me because their dialogue was just like, I don't know. At times it's so jokey and it goes for so many cheap laughs. And, there were some cheap laughs, don't get me wrong, in the 60s, but that was because of the charm and the wit of the show without it being too much in your face. And I think that's kind of what Justin Lin. I really don't think J.J. Abrams really had too much to do with this film because I see a totally different direction with this movie. What I see with Justin Lin is I see a Star Trek fan or some maybe he's not so much a fan, but he's someone who's seen Star Trek. He's seen what it's about. He sees the characters. He sees that there's antagonists, aliens, and that they capture the crew in some episodes, and Kirk's got to go on daring rescues, and there's just certain things like seeing James Kirk on the motorcycle. It's just like motorcycles don't have any place in Star Trek. Like, there was just so many things that seemed so out of place. Like they tried to put like a different feel on Star Trek, and I guess that's what they meant by Star Trek Beyond. We're going beyond what we know of Star Trek, like trying to reinvent it, try to make it something that it's not, and I think that's maybe what really annoyed me so much is I really can't get past it. It's just like how jokey this movie was. There's so many lame ass jokes with like Scotty and just I just can't get past how many times Bones has to crack a sarcastic comment. Like that's one of the best things about the '60s show, the original series is the wit and the sarcastic exchange between Kirk and Bones and reflecting on life and in between the mission we got to know the characters and You could say, oh, Brad, that's character development. They're developing characters. That's what you usually talk about, what you want out of a movie. You usually want character development, don't you? Um, and that I gotta say, yeah, I do want character development, but not when it's as misguided as this. There's just there's just way too many jokes being passed around back and forth and back and forth. And I gotta, okay, so what are some positives, because I'm really giving this movie a hard time. It's because it really was bad for me. It was terrible. um I really appreciate the costume design. There's a lot of such as the main villain. He's that's all makeup and costume design, and that's probably a lot of J.J. Abrams, and his love for practical effects, and not hammering CGI down your throat. That's not to say that this movie is not loaded with CGI, but there's quite a bit of handmade, man-made props in this movie and costumes, and I enjoyed that. And I was kind of like pushing myself, like I want to enjoy this movie. I'm like, look at this awesome costume design and everything, and just seeing the crew, and trying to appreciate everything what it's for, and the Enterprise bridge, and just all these ships, and we see the interiors, and this all this stuff was made by hand, and I want to appreciate the movie for that. But those things are kind of in the background, so I can't really just focus on that. I'm not gonna let the movie get away just because there's a couple of things that I like practical effects. Those are pretty much borrowed. J.J. Abrams set the bar for those practical effects in the first two films, and Justin Lin's kind of borrowing, those ideas of, those are good ways to make films, implementing a lot of practical effects. But we're forgetting about the plot and the pacing of this movie, and it's all over the place, and it's boring is what it is. I've never been so bored with Star Trek. I mean, the last time I was this bored with Star Trek was probably the Enterprise series, or Deep Space Nine, or Voyager. you know um, Usually, if it didn't involve the original cast or the next generation cast with Patrick Stewart, and you know um, and the rest, Brent Spiner and all that, I wouldn't really give it the time of day. And this kind of reminded me of that. In fact, I think Voyager and Deep Space Nine were more interesting because at least they had some great episodes with the Borg, and Jerry Ryan, and things like that, to at least keep the series afloat. I was just kind of sitting here, just like in disbelief of just sitting there and asleep a lot of the time, just not believing that it could really get this bad. And I kind of really feel that it's just they want to stay faithful to the fans, but why couldn't they go about it the same way like Star Wars, is what I don't get. I really still, after 3 years, don't understand why J.J. Abrams took that step in that direction with Into Darkness. Why he had to make it that similar to a movie that was already out and that was already beloved by a lot of Star Trek fans. Let it be a little bit like Wrath of Khan, but don't make it almost exactly like it. Um, and this movie, like I said, I think Beyond has a lot to do with it. They wanted to go beyond what you're used to in a Star Trek film. They wanted to go beyond, normalcy for Star Trek. And, the thing is really to see, like, normalcy in Star Trek. There's a certain formula it needs to follow. But, you notice that there's really not that many Star Trek episodes that are alike in any way, at least not with Next Gen or the original series. Um, and the thing is, right here, this movie just feels, I can't even say it follows a formula because it's all over the place. I mean, we're joking one minute, we're completely forgetting about the plot the next minute. You really have like no idea what's going on half the time in this movie. You really don't. Everything is explained so poorly. And the thing is, it's like you don't even want to really sit around to find out what it was. Because really, my mind could not focus on this film. It just couldn't. It was just being presented to me in such an unappealing way. That's what it was. There was so many other things that like you could like about this film, but it's almost impossible because of the way it was presented. I mean, really, if you look at this movie and you tell me that it's not a mess, that's why I'm really failing to understand the 83% on Rotten Tomatoes. But this is like all over the fucking place. I don't understand, guys. Like, what is good about this film other than it being Star Trek and it being a franchise that I happen to enjoy? There's not really a lot to like about it. All right, guys. Comment below. Tell me I'm crazy. Tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, or agree with me. Let me know what you think, guys.